submit questions during today's town hall through the Q&A feature. So I want to be sensitive to everyone's time and make sure we have plenty of time for this great presentation. We're going to go ahead and get started. So I am clearly not Steve Teixeira. For those of you who might have been expecting him, I'm Frank Gerdeman. I'm the director of a program called Advance here in South Lake Tahoe, and I sit on the Tahoe Chamber Board. And Steve asked if I could sit in for him today, in part because I also sit on the board of the Tahoe Prosperity Center. A quick reminder and a shout out to our sponsor of this and the entire series, Picasso. They're the modern way to buy and own a second home. You can find out more at picasso.com. And I am going to throw that link in the chat just in case you want to check it out and save it for later. Or I'm not. Maybe Emily, you could paste that into the chat for me. It's not letting me do that for some reason. With that, let me introduce today's presenters. Heidi Hill-Drum. If you don't know her and you're on this call, I'm not sure where you've been. Heidi is a force in the community. She is the executive director of the Tahoe Prosperity Center. And she's joined today by Adam Fowler, who is the director of research for Beacon Economics. And they're going to share some exciting and insightful information with all of us today. And Heidi or Adam, if I've missed anything, it is totally on me. And with that, I'll turn it over to our great panelists.
Good morning, everybody. I am going to share my screen with you all so you can see our presentation. And Frank, thank you for the introduction. I love when people say economics is exciting, since it's not normally things that we hear together, but as the Regional Economic Development Organization in Tahoe, we do like to look at the economy and the data. So that's what we're here to talk a little bit about today. And then moving into what are the next steps for our regional economy. So again, I'm Heidi with the Tahoe Prosperity Center, and we were, let's see if I can go to my next slide. Doesn't want to let me go. There we go. We were established in 2011 as the regional organization focused on the economy and community. And we were founded after the original 2010 Lake Tahoe Basin Prosperity Plan. So we are really focused on trying to improve the economy and the community for all who live and work in Lake Tahoe. And one of the ways that we do that is to make sure that we ground our information and recommendations in data. And, we have 2 states, we have 5 counties and an incorporated city. So getting data for a portion of some of those counties is challenging. We have found over the years that we have gotten much better at it, and it's not always easy to compare apples to apples in Nevada and California, but we have a Measuring for Prosperity report on our website, and we update that information every year. And then last summer, we reached out to Beacon Economics, which is a highly regarded economics firm, and asked them to do a COVID impact report for us to look at our economy and see what happened after the pandemic. And all that information is on our website. We're going to dig into some of that today, but before we go there, I wanted to share a little bit of sort of background information on where we are today in the regional economy. This is a quick snapshot of our regional population. Back in the year 2000, we had our highest population, which was around 60,000 residents. We're now down to a little over 53,000 residents in the region. And as you can see, where we've had the most growth is in that 65 and older age population. Where we've sort of lost our population is in that key working demographic, the ages between about 25 and 64. So those, young professionals as well as older professionals. We don't have the census data for each individual census tract yet around Lake Tahoe to know if the new influx of people that we're all sort of feeling and anecdotally hearing about has actually turned into a bump in population. We'll know that later this fall. But we do hope to see an increase, at least in some of that year-round residency, because ultimately that's where we've lost the most population. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I always like to include some housing information. And the reason I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this is because we all know housing is the #1 issue in our community right now. Businesses are struggling to find workers, and it's because we haven't built enough housing in the last 2 decades to house our local population and our local workforce. And we can't blame the new people coming here for the problems related to housing. It's been a long time problem, and it's unfortunately going to take a long time to fix. But I did want to highlight that there are a lot of people working on this right now. The chambers, the TRPA, the local governments, and the Tahoe Prosperity Center are really working hard on opening up opportunities for new housing for low income workers that don't make wages that they can afford to buy a house, as well as middle income and middle range housing options for everyone here. So just know we are working on it. And this is a quick, it's quite a large pie chart, but if you look at it really quick, what you'll see is that the majority of jobs in our region are in accommodations and food services, and arts, entertainment, and recreation, retail. That's more than 50% right there. And then a little bit in construction and a little bit in healthcare. And it's important to note that in construction, that's the environmental innovation sector, because all of the construction that happens in Lake Tahoe has to be done with that environment LEED certification type, green building. And then health and wellness is a sector that actually has a lot of room to grow and has grown a little bit in the last decade. And what we are really hoping to dig into with this resiliency plan, the Envision Tahoe plan, is to focus on growing those other clusters. Because if you take more than half the pie, it is all tourism related jobs. And that is typically lower wage jobs, not house buying jobs. And so what we want to do is grow those other sectors, not create something brand new that isn't existing here, or try and attract an industry that just doesn't make sense for Tahoe. But because those sectors do make sense here and they have some applicability already in our regional economy, we can work on focusing on growing those sectors. And then next, this is the slide. You've all seen this before, and I know we've talked about it a lot, and the chamber is very well aware of this. But in 2010, at the last prosperity plan, our economy was dependent on tourism to about 42%. And since the Great Recession and now the pandemic, we've gone 20%, 20 points higher to 62% dependent on tourism. So almost 2/3 of our economy right now is dependent on tourism. And what we know is that our local families, our local businesses, our local workers were really the ones that suffered the most during the COVID-19 pandemic. They weren't ready for their hours to be drastically cut. They weren't ready to be laid off. They didn't have nest eggs to pay their rent for a few months. And it's because tourism jobs tend to be those lower wage income jobs. And so being so heavily dependent on people walking up into your restaurant, coming into your bar, heading into your retail center really was highlighted during the pandemic. So again, another reason to really diversify our economy and hopefully get back to something that was more in balance, just a decade ago. So now I'm going to introduce the Director of Research for Beacon Economics, again, a firm that we very highly regard. And Adam Fowler helped author our COVID economic impact report last summer. He's got some national trends and regional trends that he's going to talk about, and then we're going to wrap it all up with what our next steps are. So thank you, Adam.
Good morning. It's great to be with everybody. I've got a short amount of time, so I am going to talk quickly. Thank you, Heidi. There is a lot of good information in this report, and happy to answer questions during the Q&A on anything I'm going to fly through. So I wanted to take a look a little bit just to bring everyone up to speed on where we are on a couple major indicators for the state of California and the U.S. There's been a lot of various indicators that have recovered in a very strong fashion. I would flag for everyone the labor market is going to be the long slog in terms of our indicators. So we see a lot of headlines about retail spending bouncing back, maybe overshooting even the trend line that was in place before the pandemic. Labor markets are going to be a little bit tough because there are a lot of behavioral variables that we're just not quite sure how they're going to play out. There's been a lot of turnover, a lot of folks, especially women, out of the labor force as schools have been in different phases of reopening. And we're not quite sure how much of the folks that have left the labor force via early retirement or needing to help their families are going to snap back or kind of reset to pre-pandemic activity. So the jury's still out on exactly the kind of churn that's happening in our labor market in a lot of the sectors that have been closed for a period of time. I want to flag right here, before joining this morning, today we're actually getting updated state numbers. So if you subscribe to Beacon's emails, you'll be getting our California numbers today. So you've got my slide is dated by a day now. But in March, I draw your attention to really the three major sectors there that have seen the biggest hits. Leisure hospitality down about 30%. Other services, which includes a lot of local things like your barber, your nail salon, funerals, those sorts of things down about 22%. And educational services, a lot of that ecosystem around our educational system has been hit pretty hard, down about 15% in California, 14% in Nevada. Leisure and hospitality for both states down roughly about 30%. We can go on to the next slide. Coming into, I want to sneak back one, I apologize. I want to draw quickly everyone's attention, and this is laid out in the report, to the figure on the right. I think it's important before 2020 and the kind of upending that happened due to the pandemic downturn to look at trend lines. If you look there on the right, we've got the Lake Tahoe Basin, and we've broken out the state averages for California, Nevada, and the nation. And you'll see there, the dark blue line, the Lake Tahoe Basin, eases its way back up to about 0% growth in total coming out of the Great Recession, where the state of California was up 17% over that period, Nevada up 16%, the nation as a whole up 14%. So while there has been growth in individual sectors, it's often been netted out by changes in industries such as manufacturing, even logistics in the region, prof sci tech, and other industries. So I would flag that coming into this pandemic downturn, we were just in the region kind of on net getting back up above where we were coming out of the Great Recession. We can go on to the next slide. What's interesting on the left is California, on the right is Nevada. What I would draw your attention to, and I would tether this to the narrative Heidi was talking about in terms of the low wage sectors. There on the right in California, we break out employment by middle, high, and low incomes. And in California, you're seeing very starkly, and you can actually, I apologize for the small font there, but really going into November, December, we have a drop off in those lower income employment numbers. And we've got what a lot of folks are talking about as a K-shaped recovery, not rebounding at the same rate that their middle and higher income peers are. And that's important because regions across the state have various mixes of those industries and occupations. And so the economies that are a little from a number of payroll providers. El Dorado County down about 14%, Placer down 14%, Douglas and Washoe in Nevada down about 8% in Douglas and 3% in Washoe. This is important A lot of this is related to just public health mandates. Those are finally slowly becoming into equilibrium, and we expect the 2 California counties to begin to mirror a bit closer to their Nevada counterparts. But important to flag there that you've got a little bit different side or a little bit different story on each side up until March and April. Consumer spending. This is one of the first times in recorded history that the recession has been driven by the service sector. Almost since we've been collecting data at the federal level, recessions haven't been driven by service sector downturns. Usually haircuts, usually your services spending remains stable through a downturn, whether that spending is enabled by unemployment insurance, the replacement rate in California being 40–50%, depending on the occupation. Folks are able to continue to spend on services. A novel airborne virus made in-person activity different, and this is the first time we've seen the downturn driven by service sector spending. And you can see by the breakouts there in California on the left, mirroring Nevada quite a bit. Entertainment spending down about 30%, transportation spending down 31%. Now, what have we seen replace that? And I think it raises a lot of questions for the nature of not only retail, but a lot of our service sector jobs. We've seen folks spending replaced by online purchases. We've seen grocery, home goods, home repairs, again, eclipse the pre-pandemic trend line. So the spending on services, experiences, arts, entertainment has moved over into goods, and goods purchased oftentimes via online portals. So how much of that is sticky? I think how much of that is driven by an actual change in consumer behavior, we're not quite sure yet. But we know the data we have seen from debit card purchases that a lot of that may be a little stickier than we would like. So even for retail, which was in the middle of some long-term changes before the pandemic, there may be some real behavioral consumer changes. And so as the goods spending kind of evens back out, we expect that service sector spending to increase. And for this region, I just think you're going to have a through the roof 2021, really breaking probably most of your records you've had over the last decade. Go on to the next slide. So consumer spending by county. Douglas is the outlier here, up about 27%. The rest right around the baseline pre-pandemic. El Dorado County up about 4%. And this is across all categories. So again, some of the categorization differences, services versus goods, are netted out in recent months across all 4 counties. With that, the final thing I will say is the labor impact is going to be the thing to continue to watch. A lot of headlines will be talking about inflation. At this point in time, we see a lot of the kind of headline numbers as artifacts of the accounting system that produces them. So when you are looking at year-over-year change from the bottom of a dip, which was what we saw when there basically was no market for things like airfare, transportation, those kind of radical upswings, we see them balancing out over the year. Not a lot of concern at this point in time, even though the recent month-over-month, year-over-year numbers have been a little bit unnerving. We still see like we're going to be in good shape this year. The second quarter forecast for the U.S., almost 12%. We think this year overall up about 6.5%. So it's going to be a roaring 20s. We just need to keep an eye on how the human beings are going to be plugged back in to the labor force as UI benefits and household spending shifts back to income-driven sources. The consumer spending that the unemployment has enabled to keep strong will have a question mark around it as folks decide maybe to continue their early retirement or stay out of the labor force. With that, I will kick it back over to Heidi.
Thanks, Adam. So what the Tahoe Prosperity Center wants to do next is to figure out how do we transition our $5 billion regional economy into something that's a little bit more sustainable. So we're not as negatively impacted by pandemics, or it could be a natural disaster, a big wildfire again in our region, or flooding or road closures due to boulders falling down. All those things have happened in our region. And actually lately it feels like there's been a bunch of earthquakes. So hopefully nothing major like that. But becoming more resilient means expanding our other economic clusters and taking advantage of our strengths. So our $5 billion regional economy will always be dependent on tourism to some degree, but it doesn't need to be 62% or even higher dependent on tourism. So what we know is that we have an environmental innovation cluster, we have a health and wellness cluster, and our recreation needs to be more sustainable and our tourism needs to be more sustainable. So we're looking at ways to expand and grow those kinds of jobs. They're higher wage jobs, they tend to offer benefits, and they tend to be year round. So they're more reliable for paying your rent and childcare and the things that matter to our families. And the Beacon report last summer highlighted a number of strengths in our region, and it also gave us a number of important recommendations that we are looking forward to working on with our Envision Tahoe plan. So one major strength is that we have quite a skilled workforce already here. When you compare our college graduate rates to California and Nevada, we have skilled workers in our community. They just aren't working in the jobs relative to their skills or their college degree. They may be bartending or, managing a little retail shops or something like that. So if we can match up that skilled workforce with the industry clusters that we know relate to Tahoe and that we have here, there's a natural opportunity there to grow and to expand. There's a few other things on here. Again, we need better broadband. And now with the state and federal investments that can be made, I think we can leverage some local dollars with those infrastructure investments as we move forward. So this is sort of our work plan. We're calling the Prosperity Plan 2.0. In essence, we're calling it Envision Tahoe. So we want to envision what the future of Tahoe can look like related to our economy and improving the quality of life for local residents, expanding work opportunities, all of that. So we just kicked this off, and it's about a year-long process. We move fast because we don't have time to do a report and then talk about it for 2 years. We like to move quickly, and we're going to be doing this all around the lake. But this is the part of the presentation where we want to hear from you. So I try to keep my presentation short. I know I tend to talk too fast, but really what we want to do is to hear from our business leaders, our community leaders, our government leaders, our local residents. What do you think is needed to help diversify our local economy? What jobs or skills are most needed to provide those house buying wage jobs? What types of businesses could thrive here in our community? We have a survey on our website. The page, I'll paste it into the chat here in a minute, but Envision Tahoe, and there's a lot of opportunities here for you to weigh in and to give us some feedback and information as we move forward. So with that, I will turn it back to Frank to moderate the chat and the discussion, and just let people chime in. And I don't guess I need to share my screen much more than that. I'll put all this in the chat instead so that folks can weigh in.
Thank you, Heidi and Adam. We have a couple questions, so we'll start with, I think you're still, that's great, still sharing. For either, do you feel the shift in being so reliant on tourism for our economy is due to locals not shopping spending due to pricing, or is it just wages being low? And I think that gets back to some of those earlier charts, Heidi, that you showed that kind of showed the percentage of jobs and revenue.
I can say that broadly speaking, and I'll let Heidi interpret the question how she thinks best. I mean, there are just examples throughout economic development history where you don't want a stool with just one leg, right? It's you really, and it's tourism is the conversation here. But you know, when you think about Detroit, when you think about other examples around the country, even those that popped up around aerospace in Southern California, if you diverse economies are healthier economies at the end of the day, and to the extent you can build in sustainable, we don't know what changes in technology, changes in policy at our level or internationally may mean for a number of industries, right? In Southern California, I think an example is, what does it mean to be producing and having hubs for film and television around the globe? From the firm perspective, that's important for when things like COVID hit and maybe the policy response is lacking in various jurisdictions. It gives you the opportunity to be flexible and move that activity elsewhere. But that also changes almost every conversation in those local communities, especially, for example, in Southern California, in terms of the revenue base, expectations about those adjacent clusters and things like that. So resilience to me is just having more legs on the stool if you can.
And Heidi, feel free to jump in, but I'd also ask if you submitted that question and you feel like we didn't get to the answer, please give it another shot and we'll do our best. The next question, do you feel more businesses could do a better job training the younger workforce?
I can take that one. I think, I've lived here, I don't know, 25 years now. So, when I moved here, I was young. I worked at a ski resort. And it took a while, but eventually I worked my way into a year-round, benefited job and was able to buy a house and raise my family. I think our region has been very reliant on that seasonal younger workforce, and expecting that they will always be available and always be there. And I think most of our businesses, especially this summer, are realizing that's not the case anymore. We don't have the housing anymore for that younger workforce, for that seasonal college student who just wants to come up to Tahoe for the summer. And that's negatively impacting, I think, our local businesses. So I do think our workers, our businesses could do a better job at training in general, but I don't think it needs to just be targeted to the younger workforce. I think we actually should be looking at keeping and retaining our great employees, especially those ones who want to stay and raise their families, and like me, ended up falling in love with this place and don't want to leave. And so I think it's a little bit of both of those aspects. It's not just training younger folks to it's actually maybe retraining some folks who want to switch industries. Maybe they don't want to work in a restaurant anymore. Maybe they want to work in retail. Or maybe they want to go from working in retail into, accounting or something different, or working at the college. So I think there's a lot of ways to look at that. I don't know if that answered your question or not exactly. So.
Yeah, and I would echo. I think it's both. I mean, for all of our workforce development work we've done, the thing I think we have to flag for the public sector is that, especially for small businesses, there aren't people hanging out with no portfolio of work ready to train people. For most folks, when there is turnover, that means someone else in another position, whether it's manufacturing or professional services, has to also manage their existing portfolio of work and try to train their colleagues. And that's really hard in terms of resourcing. And so I think while you see it even when, in Southern California, bringing in foster care or other students for internships. There's just, it's just very hard, and there aren't resources there. The margins in a lot of these businesses are such that there aren't extra hours People barely have an HR department in a lot of small businesses. There isn't the kind of talent investment. And so I think we need to be cognizant of that. And so I think that's where the public-private, the resourcing of those kinds of investments, and hopefully, with digital education taking off in a more, a lot more people at least working on it, that maybe there's some pooling that can be done across firms. But I think putting it on the small business, we just got to be able to be realistic. It's tough sometimes.
Frank, I think you should answer that question.
With my program hat on,
Yes.
perhaps. I think we need to make sure we have clear, supportive pathways. Again, Adam, you're right that requires public-private partnership. That includes education, workforce development, and employers. It's apprenticeship model with the capital A and a lowercase a. It's internships, it's job shadows, but it's an intentional, supported process that means someone enters an entry-level job. There are supports and pathways to family-sustaining wages, whether they enter that job at 16 or 17 or 40. And so figuring out how we do that, I think remains one of our opportunities here in the basin. Someday maybe Advance will do a whole piece on our work, and we can share more about that. I do think that you two sort of answered that question. What I'd like to do, there aren't a lot of other questions coming in, but Heidi, you post some questions to the panel or to the group, to the attendees. I can see the list. I know most of you. So, Heidi has asked, for some input and feedback on what you think some of the opportunities are, maybe even some of the challenges and barriers. I'm an educator, so I'm not afraid to call on people. So if you have some thoughts or some feedback or some initial ideas that might help Heidi and the Prosperity Center as they kick off this work on Envision Tahoe, I'm sure it would be greatly appreciated. And with that, I'm just going to go ahead and start. I'm going to call on Chris Proctor. I see you're out there. So you can try the I'm on the road traveling shtick, but would love to hear your thoughts.
That's health and wellness. It would be good to hear, what Barton feels maybe some of the future of the health and wellness sector might look like.
You're probably going to have to type it into the chat, Chris.
I don't know. Can Emily unmute him?
I bet she could. Maybe we're in webinar mode. She might be able to.
Yeah. There.
So now you have to unmute yourself, I believe, Mr. Proctor. And while he's doing that, you can, if you know me, and I know the people in the group who do, you can count on me calling on you as well. So you might want to be thinking about what you might say, or beat me to the punch and type it into the chat. All right. While we're waiting for, I'll ask a question. Maybe, and this, Adam, this one is for you. Really, it's given that we saw. I think initially, surprisingly, and then as the pandemic dragged on and people really wanted to get outside, not so surprisingly, still a fairly strong performance in local tourism. Do you think, much like retail spending habits, do you think we're seeing a blip in sort of tourism, recreational change behaviors, or long term, or it's too early to tell?
That's a good question. I think for this year and next, you'll be performing above trend, would be my estimate, because there's just a lot of pent up demand. And I think, anecdotally, we've heard from a lot of different folks. They're exploring parts of California they haven't. So, I think the local tourism has been very real. You've seen it in kind of different jurisdictions around the state, San Luis Obispo, other kind of places where their trends, looked very different than hotel behavior near major airports, other kind of parts of the tourism ecosystem. So I think you're going to perform. I mean, I think it's going to be packed for a while. That's a good question on if that changes permanently. I think there might be a little bit of a paradigm shift across a lot of metrics. I think economists are a little nervous to talk about that. We're more comfortable in a world where the rubber band snaps back to the world we had across all the dimensions before the pandemic. But I don't know. This has been a really the time frame has been so long that I do think behaviors on a lot of dimensions, consumer behavior and employment activity behavior may have some changes that really shift the paradigm a little bit.
And Frank, I think we've already seen some more permanent changes potentially, because we have our airport is expanding flights from Southern California, from other parts of the country. Whereas we used to have to really, like, we had to pay the airlines to fly into Reno, and now Reno is one of their top destinations because it accesses outdoor recreation. And in that change is not something that the airlines do willy-nilly or just for a short time period. That's something that they're looking at long term. So I do think it's a change that we'll see longer term, not just short.
Great. And apparently threatening to call people out has resulted in more questions. So I'll get back to those and read those off. Thank you, Heidi. At some point, I'll come back to that and ask about whether we've been able to get from any of the visitors authorities changes in demographics of who has been coming compared to years past. But first, given the challenges to building new housing, lack of trade workers, raw materials, et cetera, how will Lake Tahoe attract and retain the workers that are supporting 62% of the economy?
Build more housing now. I mean, it's again, I know I breezed through it. It is our number one challenge, but in an hour-long discussion on the economy, we could spend 58 minutes just talking about housing. So, we have on our website, there's a whole detailed information page on housing. Many of our partners on housing are here in this Zoom room. Again, there are a lot of things that are happening to build new housing, to renovate old housing, and to open up opportunities. But it is the number one issue that we have to tackle in our community. And I think we're making progress. It's not fast, and I'm so sorry for that. If I were in charge and could wave my magic wand, it would be done tomorrow and it would be built this summer, but it's unfortunately not as quick as we would like. So we'll keep pushing uphill, and there are a number of projects in the works that will help. Again, with that tourist base of workers, and with the teachers and the nurses at the hospital and everyone else that we also need housing for.
So I'm gonna add a quick follow-up. Have you heard of any community or employer or industry that is kind of taking innovative sort of immediate steps, right? We know because housing takes so long, even, Sugar Pine Village project here in South Lake is great, but it's 2, maybe 3 years on the horizon. So have you heard of anyone that's sort of coming up with innovative solutions for this summer, for next winter, and for next summer?
I'd have to get back on that. There are a number of communities that we look to for good examples, but I don't think anyone is doing it immediately. I think they are all like, we do look and we compare ourselves a lot to other resort communities, Mammoth Lakes, and ski resort communities in Idaho and Montana and Wyoming. There's a lot of synergy between those small communities and what they're doing on housing. But no one is doing it immediately. The only immediate thing that we've done on housing is for our homeless community, and that was through Project Home Key in California. And kudos to the Tahoe Coalition for the Homeless and the City of South Lake Tahoe and TRPA and others for jumping in on that and converting some old motels into housing for our homeless folks. So that's been probably the best example of something that was immediate, but it was because it was funded directly, by the state, and we had a wonderful organization to coordinate and get that going.
Great, thank you. So For both of you, how do you see real estate and a possible bubble burst impacting us in Tahoe? Understanding that neither of you are necessarily real estate prognosticators.
I wish I could, well, I don't know that I wish. I guess for folks looking to buy, I wish I could say there was any relief in sight. This isn't a bubble. The regulatory reforms that accompanied Dodd-Frank after the financial crisis, these folks have really good FICO scores. They're coming with cash in hand. There's no, the person making 30 grand a year and having 2 or 3 mortgages that showed up in the data, into 2006, 7, 8. It's not what we're having here. This is just back to basics. There is demand. California's economy is going to be really strong coming out of this. And we just don't have the supply. And, now you can think about the component parts that make up a unit of housing, and labor is going to be a rough challenge. And that's not just here in California. You just see it in the time series data on folks that left those trades after the downturn. They either retired or went into other lines of work, and there's not a really robust pipeline of lots of those trades to quickly, turn the lever and deploy. So labor prices are going to be rising. I mean, everybody, the commodities around various wood types is through the roof. And, the regulatory structure. What people don't appreciate is in California, that piece of land, when we can't subdivide it and amortize that price of the land across multiple units, it gets baked into the unit price. And so in these dense, urban areas where there's lots of job activity, what you can and can't build with the general plan and zoning codes comes into the prices as well. So it's, it's going to be a year of, you see it in the supply numbers. Almost every month when we look at the supply of inventory, it's a new record low in terms of days of inventory. So, there's lots of folks that want to buy and can't, and it's going to be like that for a while.
Thank you, Adam. Next question. It does seem important to foster higher skilled, higher paying jobs, but there will still be a need for entry-level service retail supportive industries. What's the best way to support that industry on an ongoing basis? And I know housing is one of the problems, but interested in other aspects as well. And I'm going to start very quickly in this, and it's one, hopefully Jude Wood, who I see has been sort of given some access to the panel piece, might weigh in. Certainly childcare is an issue. We're seeing that nationally in terms of return to work, right? If I'm correct, and Adam, please correct me if I'm not. Almost all of the job gain nationally in April were men. It was really a statistically insignificant number of women who returned to the workforce. So certainly childcare, schools opening, those kind of things out of the pandemic are going to be critical to that. But are there other issues as well?
Yeah, and happy to chime in there. So pre the pandemic, we already had a childcare crisis in this town. And it's a confusing term, but they call it occupancy rates. So essentially in a healthy local economy, there is about 15 to 20% of occupancy rate, which essentially means that every childcare business, be it a private in-home kind of mom and pop, right the way through to kind of like perhaps the more, professional entities we see at the college and in Lake Tahoe preschools, step by step, etc., that they have on average about a 15 to 20% ability to take on more kids. Now, we just did not have that even pre the pandemic. And when we got into school age, it was even worse, because down here on the South Shore, really for school age kids, the Boys and Girls Club is it for a continuous 5-day service. We have lots of fantastic groups who, you know, do sports and other activities, but for actual kind of childcare perspective, it's us. And we had zero availability, and we still have zero availability. And that the pandemic really escalated that issue across 0 through to 18 years, because we all had our capacity reduced by social distancing measures. You know, quite rightly, we needed to protect our children, we needed to protect our staff, but we have, whilst, you know, businesses are going back, according to the CDC, I'm still on a 1-to-14 ratio, you know, and it's important that we're still able to protect our kids and our staff while they're unvaccinated, the kids at least, all our staff are. So this is really compounding a lot of issues. And it's been a heartbreaking month for me as we've been enrolling for the summer program, which we are at 50% of our pre-COVID capacity, when I have people calling me up and saying, I've been offered a job, I can't take this job unless you get my kid into the club. You know, and that is heartbreaking. It's a really, really hard thing for us and the staff to deal with. And it's an even harder thing for those parents to be going through. And so, you know, whilst we're still unfortunately keeping our focus on essential workers and those who have to be at their place of work in order to remain employed. So really that is going to be this summer, our housekeepers, our restaurant workers, you know, the sort of folks where you can't have your toddler by your side while you are working. And it is going to be absolutely vital for the future prosperity of Tahoe that we solve this childcare crisis. We need more options, because even though, you know, many of us have juggled working from home with also doing online school with our kids, I have yet to meet someone who told me that that was their ideal working situation. You know, even if folks are going to stay remote, they do not want to stay remote whilst also schooling their child or looking after their child. They would still prefer their child to be in a fully engaged off-site program. So we need to get more, and
Absolutely.
for all age groups.
Well, thank you, Jude. I think, you know, that just drives home the point that as housing is a huge issue, but childcare is and will continue to be another significant one. And Adam or Heidi, are there other sort of big issues like that you think might also need our attention as we move forward very quickly, and then we'll move on to the next question?
I try to think, I mean, childcare, absolutely. My fingers are crossed. My blind optimism hopes that some of the plans at the federal level can get bipartisan support. It is such a real economic issue. We just see it over and over again. The pandemic has flagged that, and it's not just Tahoe. It's most of our metro areas across the United States. I will say, you know, housing is so important because it's, you know, by allowing more supply, it's really no cost in some sense to the city. We can talk a little bit about services that go with new housing, but, you know, to allow a parcel to be 2 units rather than 1 it's a cheap solution. I would say, as we talk about retail, you know, this isn't as sexy, but I will say it because it matters. Lots of local jurisdictions have a lot of constraints on what retail looks like. And we've all been proud of ourselves for allowing the restaurants to have their curbside eating. You know, if you'd have asked me 2 years ago, could we do that in a number of months, I would have laughed, because I just know here in Southern California, having worked on those issues, how tough that is. But we need to think about, again, just as childcare was on the radar before the pandemic, the changing nature of retail and the space it utilizes was happening well before the pandemic. And we need to make sure that space, whether that's pop-ups, other experiential opportunities that aren't traditional leases, that are different uses of space that aren't in the municipal code, that we're empowering the changing nature of retail rather than serving as an obstacle in front of it. And so I think that is going to be, if you look around the globe, I have a great slide in one of my other presentations. We have 3 or 4 times the square footage of retail space than any of our peer countries. And I think, as vacancy rates, as online becomes the primary mode for a lot of even bigger brands, we need to think about what the future of retail looks like and try to be dynamic in our local regulatory infrastructure.
Thank you, Adam. Let's see. When does tourism eclipse the ability of Lake Tahoe to support it? Is there a maximum amount of people that can be supported by the available workforce, services, environment, and transportation?
I'm trying to get off mute. There we go. So again, if you look at our overall population, we had 60,000 full-time residents in the year 2000. We're down about 7,000 residents. And even with our new neighbors who've moved in on my street and your street and everywhere else, I still think we're not anywhere near the height of our full-time year-round population. So I think that, the issue we have to tackle, and maybe Adam can weigh in on this, is how do we manage services and availability of workforce for year-round residency and the 15 million people who come to Tahoe seasonally or annually over the course of the year. Our population goes from 53,000 to 253,000 on a busy summer weekend, or heck, it seems lately even on a Wednesday in the middle of July. So whether it's July 4th or not. So I think that's a question we'll have to dig into more.
Yeah. I think of this is an American question as well, right? As we look at population numbers for California, our growth is basically slowed. It's a question of what kind of economy do we want to be? At its heart, when we think about the rise of China, I don't think people think about the second sentence, and it's like, well, why is China going to be an economic powerhouse? And it's population. We are a consumer spending driven economy, and our birth rates are way down. The folks that are deciding to have children are having them later and less of them. Our new immigrants are mirroring the local population in their family behaviors as well. And so, if you again, I go back to like regulatory fiscal systems, a community of retired folks has a different profile in terms of revenue sources for local jurisdictions than young folks paying in from employment. And so I just think it's a question of what kind of community we want to be. And I think the regulatory infrastructure, right? If a space is locked in to be X type of space year round and doesn't have the flexibility maybe to accommodate tourists and adjacent kind of industry activity half of the year and be something else different, if it's zoned not to be able to do that, then the creativity on solving for these kind of up and down swings is limited. And so I think we've got to get really creative on space and how it's utilized year round. And it doesn't have to be, I'm a millennial, so I think about Jurassic Park. It doesn't have to be the bug in the amber frozen for all time. We can build in some flexibility around our regulatory infrastructure and empower that kind of creative use of especially space.
Can't hear you.
Of course you can't, because unlike my usual operation, I actually muted myself to be polite. So Heidi, this one is coming to you. It's a big question, and I know most of it is really not Prosperity Center's bailiwick. So do the best you can, and we'll probably say, yep, these are issues, and local jurisdictions and TRPA need to be involved. But it's basically, do you feel Tahoe makes it easy to flourish from a governmental level, or are there challenges that hinder our economy based on barriers, maybe especially around entrepreneurship?
I definitely have an answer for that. Government does not make life easy for entrepreneurs or local businesses, unfortunately, in Tahoe. We have multiple levels of government. You have to go through your local government, and then you have to go through the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. So right there, you have two agencies you got to deal with when you're opening up a business in Tahoe. That's tough enough. And then you add in your agencies, your sewer districts and public utilities and, planning agencies and whatnot around that, and it's not an easy place to do business. So do we need to make it an easier place to invest and for new businesses to come in? Absolutely. Do we need to tie that to our existing strengths in our community? Absolutely. So my favorite example is, we need to encourage companies like bike companies and ski companies and paddleboard companies to come up to Tahoe and to, use us as their testing grounds for their new innovative equipment. And then they manufacture them down in the Valley of Nevada, and their hub is here in Lake Tahoe. Their employees are well paid. They're out on the trails and on the lake testing that equipment, and then they're building it down in the valley. So those are year-round jobs. It's manufacturing. It's related to our recreation economy. It is, but in order to do that, our governments need to make doing that easier. They need to reduce the number of regulations. They need to make it clearer what the steps are. You don't go from A to B to D and then back to C. You need to go A, B, C, D in the process. And you need to be able to get that information quickly and easily from the right person the first time, and not depending on who shows up at the counter the day you happen to walk into the office. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Well, thank you very much. And I kind of suspected you might have had an answer. Much appreciated. We've covered all the questions. Yep, we have indeed covered all the questions. We're just about out of time. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, for posing your questions, for being a part of this and the ongoing conversations. I want to thank Heidi and Adam for a great presentation. I want to point out that Heidi put in the chat a link not only to the Envision Tahoe work, but also a survey. Please ask a Tahoe Prosperity Center board member. I encourage you to click on both those links. The information in the survey will be very helpful for us. Don't be surprised when Heidi, her staff, or some of the board reach out to you in the coming weeks and months to follow up on this and the Envision Tahoe plan. And of course, I really want to make sure I thank this year's Town Hall series sponsor, Picasso, the modern way to buy and own a second home. Find out more at Picasso.com. Again, thank you all for joining us today. We're really glad to have folks participating in these town halls. And on behalf of the Chamber and Steve, again, we really appreciate your partnership and your engagement in our work. Thank you.